like to welcome you to the party dance session this afternoon. My name is Gregg Anderson from Colorado Springs and my assistant Bob Riggs from Englewood, Colorado. And we are here to hopefully shed some light on different aspects of party dances, and we will welcome your comments and questions as we go through the program. We will not wait until the end. There will be opportunities, obvious opportunities throughout the presentation for you to ask your questions or make your comments. We want to cover a lot of aspects. What are they really? How can you prepare for them? What kinds of skills and various record-keeping things that you might do to help you in the whole process, to make it easy for you. Just as kind of an indication for us getting started, we've got, 25 or 30 callers in the room here today. How many currently are conducting, let's say, fewer than a half dozen parties a year? Any that are conducting fewer than a half dozen a year? A few of those. So hopefully that some of these ideas will be of value to you, and hopefully those who are doing more than that will pick up some things as well. I'm going to start off really with the concept of the fact that this is not the first night of class, and this is perhaps directed more to those who are newer into doing the party dance type of program. But the freedom that you have in doing a party dance by recognizing that it's not the first night of class is really tremendous. You don't have the need of the dancers to retain anything that you're doing because you're not going to see them next week for another class. So that gives you a lot of freedom. If they don't have to retain things, then what you do or do not say will have a lot of impact on making it a successful entertainment program. The fact that there's no particular pressure to use a particular dance figure or basic like you would in a class, because you might need to precede something you're going to teach a week or two down the road. So that limitation is totally out the window. And it's also possible, if you want to, if you decide to use something that's on the mainstream or basic list that might not otherwise be covered until weeks into a class session, but you just think it would be kind of intriguing to use that for a party night, you're certainly free to make that judgment because it doesn't rely on something having been taught before. Bob, let me go ahead and have you make additional comments on that. Did you flip up the top switch there just to make sure?
It works. Both Greg and I are sitting up here going, there's no way we're sitting down, because one of the key characteristics of both Greg's and my party dances is we're out there. We're in it. We're in the middle of it. And so sitting down for even this seminar, I was trying to figure out how to do it. I know I sat down for the whole last one, but I need exercise. So what Greg said about this is not the first night of class. I have to go back to a little philosophy here, and I may have learned this from Greg, actually. What we are there for in a party dance. We've been asked to do what I'm calling interactive entertainment. We are facilitators of an event where we're getting the participation of the participants, and it is not the purpose of this event to learn anything. The purpose of this event is to create an entertainment experience for the participants. And by doing that, we are creating something that creates fellowship and joy all at the same time. When you put all that together, you say, okay, what did I do? How did that happen? Well, you get them involved. They're creating their own entertainment, and what we are is helping them do that. So does that mean I have to teach them? When I'm on the telephone with the person who's creating the event, and we'll get into this more later, I'm actually telling them that we're going to learn just enough to have a really great time. And when the people go home, they will not have thought they learned anything. They will just know that they had a great time. Now that's different, very different, than if I'm creating an experience where they're going to be dancing either what I call frequent dancers, like club dancers, or if I expect to do something with them once a month. It's very different than a dance party.
It's also, one of the comments that Bob made sprung this thought into my mind as well. It's also important to not overteach, because you are there to entertain. You do not want to overteach. You should not be talking so much. They should be dancing. So use the minimum number of words to get them moving, and try to do that throughout the evening. Now, certainly there are going to be various line dancers or whatever that may take more of a teach than something else, but you do not want to be up there instructing too much. The session that we had over the weekend, I believe it was Clark Baker, made a very excellent comment about one caller that he had observed in a party situation where he was giving them all sorts of logistics about the structure of the square, details of the opposite lady, and all sorts of other details about the structure of the square, much of which he had no use for when he actually started calling. So he was overloading the person attending the party with a bunch of extraneous information that for that evening's entertainment had absolutely nothing to do with it at all.
How long do you think it takes to get people dancing? I like the 10-second answer.
We're not going to take any comments more than 2 words without you getting on the microphone. We would more than happy to share the microphone with you.
I know I asked a question, but it was rhetorical. I should not have done that. Anyway, the point that I wanted to make was, if you put music on and you say join hands and do anything, whether it's join hands and circle, they're dancing. And I've heard people say, well, they're not a square dancer and tell. Well, in my book, that's wrong. They're a dancer as soon as they react to a call to music.
Bob, why don't you go ahead and talk about some of the types of venues, some of the types of parties, what you're being hired for.
Okay. I do a very large... I did 50 dance parties last year. I did youth camps, about 250 kids at a time. I did wedding reception. I did a pre-wedding party for the family. I did a community dance for a community out by the pool. Let's see, what else did I did a barn dance for a family that has a barn dance every year, and they wanted some traditional square dance stuff. Well, it didn't really want traditional square dance stuff, but that's what they asked me for. I did a thing that they had labeled as line dancing, but was really a family dance with lines, circles, squares, you name it, in it, for a church group. This is the 3rd year in a row I've done that particular group. I did a Valentine dance for a church. Those are the ones that popped immediately into my head, and I didn't list them out. But the point being is a lot of different kinds of venues and a lot of different kinds of groups. Oh, I did another one. I did a youth group who was getting ready to take a trek to Wyoming. The youth group is part of the Mormon Church, and every summer they sponsor trips up to the camps in Wyoming where the Mormons wintered on their trip west to the Salt Lake City, Utah area. And so they have the kids come in, and this is sort of a pre-dance to show them a little bit of what's going on and up there, and when they go up there, because they actually square dance when they get to Wyoming. So it's sort of a fun little thing to get them some pre-stuff. I've done that a couple of years.
So what you saw in those examples, presumably, is that not only is there a mixture of attendees at any one party, different ages, but also different purposes in the party. A wedding being a very extreme situation where there's a particular set of expectations on the part of the bride and groom and their family as to what's to be accomplished. The family camp, mixed generations, which involves different combinations of choreography. An entire college age group, which can require planning a party in a different way. So there's all these different varieties that are things like father-daughter dance for Girl Scouts, where you've got the dads who maybe don't want to dance solid, where the girls want a little bit more activity. So you might be doing some dances for the girls, some dances for the fathers and the daughters together. So there's all these different kinds of scenarios for the parties themselves that will then, and especially through discussion with the person doing the hiring, will dictate how the program gets put together and evolves.
Let me add two unique ones. 2 weeks ago, 65 kindergartners. It was fun. Last summer, 40 Japanese teenagers. And I've done that for 5 years. Truly unique groups, unique requirements, unique preparation, because you have to go in, for the Japanese group, you have to go in and teach them right from left, because they understand a little English, but not enough to do what we always do. I think Greg's done the international groups as well, and it's an interesting challenge.
A dozen German theologians one time. I did one party at a ranch one year. I can't remember whether they're diplomats or techies or what from Scandinavia, I believe it was. And it was at the ranch up in the mountains. And I was standing with the owner of the ranch, and he says, well, here they come now. And they were on horseback. They were doing an afternoon horseback ride. And we looked out, and my vision's not terrific, and I don't think he realized it either. There was not a single woman in the bunch. And so right away I'm thinking, okay, how do I change this program? So you get all sorts of scenarios like that, and that creates another situation we're going to talk about more a little bit later in detail about getting information up front, but that comes later.
The story I heard, believe this was from Frank Lane. He showed up at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. He was doing a session for the Catholic Church up there. And he walks in, and there's nobody in the hall he's supposed to call in. And he sets up his equipment, and I think one of the nuns came in and introduced herself, and he said, they'll be along in a little bit. And about 10 minutes later, the door opens at the far end of the hall, and in walks a straight line of nuns in habit. 80 of them. And he said, well, my program just went out the window, and he changed everything he did. So being adaptable is something else we're going to cover.
Randy Doherty was just sharing with me this weekend. He did one of those Mormon trek parties down in Arizona, and got to the dance site where he was to do the party for these, I believe it was teenagers, and it was a long road, about 1 square wide. They parked the pickup truck with the back end so he could put his equipment on the tailgate of the pickup truck, and they had a generator for his sound equipment. But you can imagine one long, very narrow road. He obviously was going to, with fall off on both sides, he was not going to do any circle mixers. So whatever concept of a program he had come in mind with prior to arriving, he for sure wasn't going to do any circle mixers with that kind of a setup.
So I think they know the diversity of we need to tell them how to get out of this.
Good idea. There are a lot of ways to get out of it is to ask a lot of questions up front. And Bob's got some great information on his handout that talks about a whole lot of that, and I'm going to let Bob start, and I'm going to throw my 2 cents in worth as well.
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a shameless plug for the Before the Party Begins DVD, which is available from the CALLERLAB office. It was a session we did for the Beginner Dance Party Leadership Seminar in 2004. And I watched the DVD from end to end, and I wasn't embarrassed by any of it. It's about 50 minutes. It's packed with information and questions and things you should ask. And there's even a little skit at the end that you'll have to see it to believe it, because I gave a script to the person who was the caller for the party. Well, it was Kit Galvin who was helping me out, and shall we say about halfway through she deviated from the script. And I had to continue responding as if I was. She was being a very good event organizer and asking all of the right questions of me and making me respond with the right questions. So I really do recommend that DVD. The point I would make about what's on this handout is before the party begins, and we'll go into some more of this in greater depth, there's a couple of things you have to know. Number one, you have to think about what product do you want to sell in the sense of a party. If you're not ready to do 65 kindergartners, you should not. If you're not ready to do 80 nuns in habit, you shouldn't. If you're not ready to do a party dance that is got a whole diversity of material in it, that they really just want squares, that's what you should do. You should do what you're ready to be prepared to do, not something that Greg or I might do. Greg and I have our own programs. They are similar in some ways and very different in others. We've been doing this a long time, and we do a lot of parties, and we should say that many of us have learned the hard way, both of us have learned the hard way, about something we should have asked. And it's everything from the type of surface you're dancing on to how much drinking was going to go on before they got to the event, even though there was no alcohol planned for the event, to other kinds of things. You need to know a lot of information. And I could go through all of this in detail, but I think the point I want to make is that to do parties, you have to have an attitude that you're there for their entertainment and their fun. You have to have an aptitude to be flexible and organized and be able to present things. And then you have to have skills. Skills to facilitate their activities. Skills to know that, oh, okay, I can't do a couple dance because I got too many kids that don't want to have anything to do with each other. I've got more boys than girls. I need to do genderless dancing versus gender-based dancing. I need to have skills. My parties today are 99% genderless dancing. In other words, I don't care if it's 2 boys or 2 girls because I do so many youth groups. If I did couple groups, I probably would plan in a few couple-oriented things. And I did a bunch at the seminar this year, and I'm going to start using some of them because I like them.
Because you need to ask a lot of questions when you're being approached to do a party, I would encourage you to try to be as organized about it as possible. I'm a fairly organized individual with a very poor memory, so I have to write stuff down, and I happen to use a telephone log to log in phone calls that I get, and that's the first entry on any approach that I get from someone who wants me to do a party. I try to, first of all, obviously make sure I get their name and phone number or some other way to contact them. I write down as many details as we talk about in that initial conversation as to where it's going to be. Is it indoor or outdoor? What's the outdoor like? What's the indoor like? How many people? Is it mixture adults and kids? What time of day? Anything that could impact the weather. If it's an outdoor party, is there a plan B if the weather turns bad? As many questions as you can think of. There are probably going to be follow-on conversations if there are any doubts. If it's not a place that you're familiar with, if it's not an organization that you're familiar with, there may likely be follow-up conversations. So you want to be able to get in touch with that individual and find out more information as time goes by. There have even been parties where I will request, or at their request, make a site visit to the place where the party's going to be so I can assist them in helping make a successful event. And that can also point up some surprises that you get taken care of early on so that you find out, do I need different equipment than what I've got? If it's an outdoor dance, in fact, Otto Wortman was talking about one that he did just this weekend in an outdoor horse arena, and one of the first questions out of my mouth, because I've done them in horse arenas before, I said, had they rolled the ground down to pack it down? He says no. And he, I think, had asked the right questions and knew some information, so he knew not to use his laptop that night with the dust billowing around all over the arena with 200 or 300 people, especially the kids, delighting in kicking the dirt, not just walking on the dirt and other ingredients. So, and Otto had to, when he got home that night, he had to clean an awful lot of his equipment because it was just filthy. So if it's going to be an outdoor event in less than desirable conditions, you may want to have, as a normal part of your kit, plastic trash bags to put over your speakers to protect them. If there's a possibility of rain, but you have to be outdoors anyway, you may want some clear visqueen that can be readily draped over your equipment. If it's going to be a light mountain rain like we sometimes get around here, the dance goes on, but you've got to have the protection for your equipment. Someone's sending us Morse code. Oh, is that what that is? Not mine. So these are all questions that are very important to ask. Invariably, there's going to be something that you forgot to ask. It may not be a critical thing, but sometimes, and as Bob said, we learn by experience which questions that should be asked. But any Murphy's Law scenario that you can come up with in your imagination is probably worthwhile to ask the party planner about when you're having that conversation.
Example. This church group is coming up, and they're coming out from St. Louis, and they're going to spend 4 days up near Fraser, Colorado. And we're going to be at the such and such a stables. They're going to be riding in the afternoon, and then we're going to have a dinner, and we're going to dance afterwards. Okay, where are we going to be dancing? Outside. What kind of area is it? Well, it's a grassy meadow area. Okay. Is there power there? Well, no, but we'll provide a generator. Okay. Give me directions, time, all the other stuff. Okay. I arrive up there. I go through Fraser. Take the first left after you get out of Fraser. Okay. Take the first right after that. There's a place with the sign of the stables on it. It's a little teeny tiny building and a corral. There's 3 60-passenger buses sitting in the parking lot. No people. I'm going, where the heck are they? There's no place for them to be. I wander around there. I walk around. I can't find anybody, any sense of where they were. They didn't tell me that I had to take a little road and go a half a mile back from this road. There's a little building back there that's no bigger than this room, and there's 160 of these guys. All right. So we really were going to dance outside. Okay. It turned out to be one of the most memorable experiences of my life because, first of all, they had dinner. The generator wasn't there yet. They had to go get it. They went and got it. The one they got wouldn't start, so they went to go get the other one. It wasn't big enough to power a 201, but it would power a 75. Luckily, I brought both. The dance service, there were clods of grass way high all over the place. It was a broken ankle waiting to happen. But we danced. And about 8:15, here are the kids all dancing out here in front of me. And beyond me across the valley is the west side of the Continental Divide with snow on it. It's still June. About 8:15, the sun sets behind me, and that snow turns crimson. Most beautiful thing I can ever experience to date in our Rocky Mountains. And here's joy happening in front of me. And we were able to make it happen. And by the way, it did rain too. But I didn't ask quite enough questions, and I learned a lot.
And there are still times when I don't ask enough questions, but a lot of times when I get a call, I will ask, where did you get my name? Because sometimes that will tell me what their expectations are. Their expectations can communicate to me what fee might be appropriate to be charged. There are some times when I have quoted a fee and they agree so quickly, I think, dadgummit. Not that I would gouge anybody, but by the same token, we get so conditioned over the years calling for square dance clubs to undersell our services. And it's so easy to stay in that mindset. And if you don't charge what the market is really worth in what you're doing, then you can feel disappointed in yourself. But I also ask questions about, after I've nailed down things like the length of the dance they want, I always ask them, are you having a dinner prior to the dance? If they say yes, I say, would you like background music for dinner? Typically it's a Western type themed event. That's why they called me in the first place. I've got a ton of cowboy music, all sorts of artists doing cowboy music, and I offer to provide them appropriate background music for dinner. So we get that nailed down. Sometimes I say, well, that's all. They say, well, how much does that add to the cost? And depending on what I've already figured out I'm going to charge them anyway, I might just say, well, there's no additional charge for that. That's included in the fee. And a lot of times I might also be sitting at my computer madly bringing up my data sheet, my database of what I charge various groups in the past, especially if it's one that I did a dance for and they called me to do another dance for them, and I'm trying to bring up on the computer, because of my poor memory, what it was that I charged them for the dance last year, because I certainly don't want to quote anything that's less than that. So there's all these questions that can be asked, and sometimes I may have to say to them, or they may ask me, well, would this date or this date work? And I may say, well, they will either work now, and I will tell them, I will go ahead and pencil them into my calendar. And they say, well, what if you give that dance away? And I say, well, if someone calls me for one of those dates, I will call you back, because you have priority on those dates. Whichever of those two dates, I've got them reserved for you until we talk again. So fear not that I'm not going to give that date away to someone else until I talk to you again.
That's absolutely imperative. Sometimes they have a fixed date that they can't do it on. I actually had one call me for the 21st of July last week, and I can't do it on the 21st of July. But I said I could do it on the 20th, and by the way, we've moved it to the 20th. Okay? So sometimes there's flexibility on their end. Sometimes it's dates. We've penciled it in. In the next week, I'm going to firm that up. And I usually firm it up with email contact so that I get things in writing from both ends. So I know I didn't misinterpret something that they said, and vice versa. So I actually am beginning documenting, and I just started this, documenting everything that I have in my record about what I'm going to do for that dance, in feeding it back to them.
One of the most, I guess I would refer to it as a minefield of possible Murphy's Law situations, is the wedding-related event. If you get involved in doing these, they can be very stressful. They can be a whole lot of fun. They can be very stressful, but you will do more communicating with probably the bride or the bride's family prior to the event than you will for any other type of event that you do, because there will be a lot of, they get paranoid, is probably a very good word, because this is their day. They don't want anything to go wrong. So it can lead to, and before you even quote a fee, you have to find out, well, how much do you really want me to do? I did a New Year's Eve wedding reception in Colorado Springs, and I was to provide music after the wedding ceremony itself, during the refreshment period while they were taking, I guess they'd call that hors d'oeuvres, wouldn't they? Yes. While they were taking pictures over in the wedding chapel, and then during dinner, and then do my program dance, and then act as a DJ afterwards for another hour, hour and a half. Well, as it ended up, counting my setup time and tear down time and doing the dance and providing the music, I was standing up for 7 hours for that event. You darn well want to get paid well if you're going to do that to your body, because it is, especially at my age, it's an exhausting experience. Still very rewarding, but it can be a very exhausting experience. Had I not asked the right questions up front, I would have perhaps felt disgruntled. Despite my joy in being part of such a wonderful event, I probably would have been disgruntled at having not charged near enough for all that I put into the event.
So we're encouraging you heavily to ask questions and to gather all sorts of information. But now that you've gathered that information, what do you have in the way to put on what they've asked for? If you're going to be a DJ, that means you have to have the kind of music that you expect to play for the period of time you're being a DJ. And that depends a lot on the type of event. If you're doing an event for a bunch of retired folks, you might want some big band music, and you might want some music that's maybe not the latest and greatest. If you're doing a country western type of environment, you might want country western music. And if you're not prepared with music that will match the forum, then you're not quite delivering. Plus, you need to have the dance material that you're going to present and your program for the dance material. So for whatever it is that you've got, if you've got a whole bunch of singles or you've got a whole bunch of kids, you have to have material that's going to match that arena. And you have to recognize beforehand, what is it I'm going to present? Am I going to use a lot of trios, or am I going to use a lot of line dances, or am I going to use a lot of couple dances, or am I going to use solely squares or contras or whatever? There's a lot of variety that you need to prepare in your head, and it can't be the program that I do or the program that Greg does. It has to be a program you can do.
That variety is one of the keys to the success of a program. And by that I mean, if you think of a mainstream or plus square dance that you might call, and all the choreography that you use during an evening's dance to entertain the dancers, when you get to the party atmosphere, you don't need as much choreography. You actually need very little choreography. You can get by with things like circle left and right and star figures and lines and do-sa-do and arm turns without getting very complex, because if you do all of those from different formations, from circle mixers, from trios, from squares, from Sicilian circles, each of those formations makes those figures seem somewhat new and fresh. So it adds immensely to your program. You've all of a sudden, you don't have much choreography, but you've got a ton of dance formations, which greatly expands your program and the success of the program, because there's kind of something in there for everyone. Trios, lines of three, done in circles, whether the trios are facing each other or all lines of three are facing line of dance counterclockwise, are wonderful for different age groups. Get the kids mixed in with the adults, it's something that the kids have a greater success rate at because they have the adults mixed in with them. That type of choreography is also great for, let's say you do a adult singles party where the women far outnumber the men. These ladies don't have partners. Lines of three is one of those genderless partner type dances where the partner's not needed, so it greatly expands the program. I should throw in a plug for the Beginner Party Leaders Seminar. I look around, I see some of you were here this weekend for the Beginner Party Leaders Seminar. Cal Campbell and Bob and his committee have been having these before the CALLERLAB convention every year. They really meet two needs. They meet the need of callers who want to exchange ideas on a community dance type program where you have people coming back from time to time, but there is a wealth of material and knowledge that is shared on that will make you much more proficient doing the parties that we're talking about this afternoon. So if you have never attended one before, I encourage you to keep that in mind for a future CALLERLAB convention. Some of the other things that can make you invaluable to the group that has hired you is to step beyond your normal profession. Obviously, they're hiring you because you're a professional square dance caller, or maybe you're specialized in line dance instruction, whatever. But there are so many other things. We've already talked about being a DJ and all its requirements to have more music, a variety of music. It also, people are so cognizant anymore about, and I heard one young woman explained it in this regard. They have gotten used to THX sound in the movie theaters. They know what good sound is. If you do not have the best that you can afford, make that a gradual goal to try to upgrade your equipment. I remember doing a dance party before I got my Hilton MA150. I was using my AC200 blue, which makes it pretty obvious. I mean, everything's black and gray these days. This is blue. And I was doing it in a very nice Western environment. We had a stagecoach over here and a little saloon over here. It was an indoor deal. I mean, it was just a wonderful venue. And one guy came up, he looked at my blue hill, he says, "What is that?" And I thought, that's probably a typical reaction of someone who, I was not using records anymore. I had already converted to mini discs, but I still had my Hilton as my amplifier. From then on, as long as I had that piece of equipment, I have black cloth in my car. I would cover up, I get everything hooked up, and I'd cover up the Hilton with a black cloth. Because I didn't need to use a turntable, so I had my nice black mini disc player over here and my other stuff that looked professional, my black speakers, but I just wanted to hide that thing that didn't look quite as professional as what they get if they see a DJ in action or something like that. But there's other things that you can do. I'm a doer, not a sitter. So when I get to a party, if they need help organizing something, moving tables or whatever, I'm not too proud to do something like that if it helps them. Also, I oftentimes get questions. They call me, they want to have the party, but they don't have a location for it yet. So I keep a typed list in my file, readily handy, of all the halls that I can think of in the area that might be suitable, and usually with contact information on what phone number they call to arrange to maybe book that hall. So that's a resource that, because of my years of experience, I now have of knowing what facilities might be in town that I can suggest to them. I've also seen enough buffet meals served in my life to know what makes for a good traffic pattern and a bad traffic pattern. If they talk about having 300 people here and they're going to have a buffet dinner, if I get involved with offering suggestions on that, I talk about multiple food lines and things like that, and I've even met people at a particular hall that I recommended they hire, and I suggested, okay, I suggest you have the table set over here for the food service and such, because there's nothing worse than to have more people than the buffet line can accommodate in a speedy manner. It can horribly lengthen the meal time, which delays the start time of the dance. If the dance time, if the hostess is coming to you, say, "I want to get the dance going," and I say, "Well, there are so many people still eating." Well, go ahead and start anyway. I like to use a grand march to start a dance. You can't start a grand march when you got a dozen people when there's 100 people still eating. So that means go to plan B, start with some line dancers or something. So I feel it's to my interest that if I can offer my expertise in how to set up a buffet line, I'll go ahead and offer that information and try to guide them a little bit as to how to do it.
I would say ditto to all of that. You can be a tremendous help in the event planning arena because you end up getting that information. And this lady that was suggesting this thing for July 21st, she not only needs a hall, but she also needs a caterer. And she's thinking of barbecue. Okay, I know a couple of barbecue places that I referred her to. So being able to, now I am willing to take on the responsibility of all of those, and I'm a little unusual that I will do event planning. But I would actually prefer that they do the direct contact, because then I don't have to figure out all the bills and transfer it all of that stuff. But I would do that. And that's really stretching the square dance color.
We still have some more details we'd like to cover, but before we get to that, I would like to open it up for some mic time on your part with any questions or comments that you'd like to share or ask us, and so we can entertain those as well. Do we have any questions or comments at this point from anyone on the floor that would like to? Please, for the sake of the microphone, state your name and where you're from.
Jim Wass, Riverdale, Maryland. You were talking about the event planning thing, and I have a lot of people who don't even know what they want when they first call me. And so the event planning really starts from the first contact, and it almost seems sometimes like that's helping close the sale. You guys have that experience?
Absolutely, because they are not 100% sure of all the details of even what they want in some cases, that if you can assist them in that respect, they come back and go, okay, that makes sense. That'll be a lot of fun. And so you're likely to get that date versus them saying, well, I don't really think you're the right person for us. So even if you don't take on the role of event planner, providing that kind of assistance and help will help you get the deal.
Don Thompson, Paradise, California. First, a comment of something that I use, we've used for a number of years now, and it'll lead into my question. We use a memo, and it not only, what it does is it chronicles the information that I receive on the phone, but it also makes a statement of things that we need, like a close-in parking place, power supplied, a table, et cetera, et cetera. And I tell the contact, when I get all the general information, I will send you this memo so we know we're both singing off the same page. Which leads to the point of, I call this thing a memo. Now, across the top of the sheet is Square Dance Caller Agreement. I've avoided doing formal contracts all these years because I didn't want to get into the whole bugaboo of contracts and all the legalese and all that stuff. Maybe you guys could comment on what you've run into in that regard.
I typically, like you, don't use a contract. I guess it's more of a letter. Every now and then I get an organization that wants a letter that I sign, and I send it to them, and they sign it and send it back. I do have one college that I do 2 or 3 parties a year for, and they always fax or email me a contract, and it's a 2 or 3 pager, one that they generate. I would never create one of my own, but as long as I read it and understand it looks reasonable, I don't have a problem signing someone else's.
I think that whether they're oral or the email that documents it, you have an unofficial contract. If it's in writing on paper, it'll stand up as a contract. It's an agreement of some variety, and usually it's a communication. Now, I've gone to the written ones because I've had a few oral ones where I show up and they go, well, we decided not to do that, and I drove there and I didn't get any money for it, and they swear they called me to cancel it, and I have no proof. So I've had that happen twice in 20 years. And so I've gone to doing the email route, which is a similar kind of contract. It's a unofficial contract kind of thing. Those kinds of things will hold up in court if you end up wanting to play with it. It will cost you more to do that than it was worth in the first place most of the time.
I do like to also, as far as documentation is concerned, if I'm getting enough information in my telephone log, maybe from 2 conversations or something, or if I'm pretty certain the event's going to take place and there is quite a bit of detail that was contained in our conversation, I'll also add it to my log on my computer. I've got a Word file for 2007 and one for 06, 05, on the way back into the past, where I have, in chronological order, the entire program, or pretty close to the entire program that I used for that event, the date, the location, the fee, contact names and phone numbers. If there were any things that I didn't like about the way the event turned out, if I think it's correctable on their part, I'll make a notation for next year. If they do it, please have them do such and such. If there was anything that I didn't think that I made quite a good decision on, a particular piece of choreography that I used or something, a particular formation or whatever, I'll make a notation on that. Don't use that for this group again. So that diary, which is just one Word file that can contain all 35 or 40 parties for the year, is a wealth of information, again because of my poor memory, but also because for planning purposes, if I get called back to do the party again for that group, number one, I have a record of the music and the dances that I used. So if I think it's important to, if I think there are going to be a lot of the same repeat customers, I may elect to vary my program, which is easier to do when I know exactly what I did the other time for the party. But also it has all those hopefully helpful notes of how to make it a better party the next time. Any other questions, comments from the floor?
I'm Mike Prescott from Anchorage, Alaska. Just a comment on booking your events. If you have, say, 2 of them in a day, you've got an evening dance and someone calls you and wants to do a wedding at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. How many people have been to a wedding that went like clockwork, huh? Not too many. Be careful not to book them too close together because you're going to wind up either being late to your second one or having to leave early from the first one before your program's really done. So I don't know if you've run into situations like that.
The most horrific one, and it actually turned out very well, but my gosh, it was a wear on the body, was a wedding reception in Colorado Springs in the afternoon, and then a party scheduled in Houston, Texas the next night. And I knew the flight would work fine. In fact, I took my daughter on that trip. She was a teenager at the time, and it was a rush. In fact, I ended up, come to think of it, I ended up leaving my Hilton 75 and whatever my music source was at the time. I don't remember whether it was tapes or CDs or what it was, but I left it at the reception to pick up from the bride's family a few days later because I had a lot of pre-programmed music on it that they could just keep going, because I had finished the program part where I was teaching them dances and such, and the rest was just DJ. They just wanted some music. So fine, I left some of my equipment there, scrambled home, changed real quick, grabbed my suitcase and sound that I was taking on the airplane. It was already packed up, and headed to the airport, and I made it on time. But yeah, I was a lot younger when I did that. I'm not sure I'd do that kind of planning again. It's a little too frantic.
I agree with you. I haven't done wedding receptions, but one of those Japanese groups last summer, those were in Denver, and I had the youth camp in the evening. And I left from one and I went to the other, and I had about an hour and a half of slack. It could have gone wrong.
Any other questions, comments? Let me throw in a comment here about, we're talking about record keeping and keeping track of the program that you do for a particular event. When I've been in situations where I'm at, let's say, a ranch or a camp week after week after week for the summertime, realizing that much of the staff is there week after week after week, I like to also cater to them by offering some variety in the program. So I just devised a simple grid where I've got all my dances listed down the left-hand side of 1 or 2 pages. They might be grouped by line dances, squares, circle mixers, whatever, and then all the particular either dances or music under that. I may have under line dances 3 or 4 line dances that I use typically. Under a line dance like Texas Freeze, I might have a dozen different tunes that I use for that particular line dance. And then I have a grid of columns, one for each week that I'm going to be there for the summer. Let's say it's 12 weeks in a row. So I've got all these check boxes. So when I've done the program for that night, I can put an X in the box for all the dances that I use for that particular night. I get to the point where I'm planning the next week's program 5 minutes before the dance. No, it's sooner than that. But I have that record right there in front of me of what dances I did. So if I did Texas Freeze last week, maybe I'll do Ruby Baby this week. Or if I did Texas Freeze with one particular song, maybe I'll do the same dance but use a different song. So I feel that way I'm providing a better entertainment package. I mean, it doesn't make any difference to the guests who are only there for the one of the 12 weeks, but for the staff who's there week after week. I took over a ranch at one time from a caller who I heard later, and I think this may be even when I started doing this, later he called the same program every week. Same singing call, same line dance, same whatever. And I thought, oh my gosh, that poor staff. To hear that, I mean, they could probably have done the program for him had he not shown up.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical that you're aware of both the new people and the people who might be there when you're doing repeat events. And when you're doing even annual events, you have to be aware of that. I do several church groups once a year, and I'm very aware of what I've done in the past, and I sometimes purposely do it again, and I sometimes purposely don't do it again. So you've got to do it, go in consciously. That's the important thing, because sometimes they're looking for a certain piece. They want you to do it. And sometimes, and all the rest of the time, now it's more likely that they really don't remember. They don't remember the dance, but they do remember the music. That's the key.
Yeah, and that's one place where my good record keeping tripped me up. My desire to use a different tune the next time. I got to the end of the dance. He says, I thought you were going to do I Love the World, because I had done it before, and I didn't do it. He was disappointed. So I said, well, next time I'll promise I'll do it.
So our topic here of being prepared, or how to prepare for a night, and I think we've got, how much time do we got, Greg? Okay. How do you prepare for a night? You need to get go review all your questions, set up your program, do what Greg said about checking what you've done there before, if you've done anything there before, coming up with making sure you have all your music there, making sure you've mentally reviewed the dances, making sure that when you get there you're going to be able to set up with the appropriate sound equipment. If you don't know the hall you're going to, be prepared. Make sure you know how many people. One of the things I always ask before I even come anywhere close to setting a price is, how many people are you talking about? Are you talking about 50 or are you talking about 250? What size hall? One of the questions they're going to ask you is, well, we got this hall and we want to use it, and I don't know how big it is. And I said, well, can you tell me the dimensions of the hall? Well, we can find that out for you. Okay. Would you please do that? Because you've said you're going to have 200 people there. I'd like to know, make sure we have enough space so I have an understanding of how we're going to fit in there. If they're going to have 200 people in there and you could fit them in there in squares, they won't fit in there in a single circle. So you got to be aware of the space that you need to do the kind of dances you're planning to do. Is the room long and narrow, or is it short and squat? Is it rectangular? You need to know that. And if you don't know that, that's going to surprise you. And when you're thinking about your program, assuming you've asked the question about the hall dimensions and the number of people, now you are saying, okay, I have to use a dance that's going to have 3 circles in that room, which means if I'm going to do Jiffy Mixer, I can't do that. I've got to change it somehow because it's got the back away from each other and all the lines are going to get intermixed. So I've got to change. I can't. That one's not a great dance for this environment. That's an example. So am I prepared before I get there to know that I'm not going to use Jiffy Mixer in any of its forms that night because it won't fit in the hall, it won't fit with a number of people?
And the first thought that should pop into one's mind at that point is, okay, what mixer do I know that does not require the partners moving away from each other, where they're staying together close in the circle before they move to the next partner? Because
Right.
I had a hall exactly like that, very small. Could not use Jiffy. I could use a variation of Teton Mountain Stomp.
Right. So here's where being prepared and preparing your dance for the dance is critically important. Because if you go in with the wrong material, it's just going to hurt you. And you're going to be scrambling mentally. And you want to be relaxed, able to go out and socialize with the people. They're going to come up and talk to you, and you don't want to be going, what am I going to do next? You don't want to be there.
Speaking of scrambling mentally, 21st century technology comes to mind. It was so easy with the 45 RPM platter and our records, especially if you were like me. Being an accountant, I'm so organized. I had nice little sleeves for my records, and they were color-coded labels. I mean, green for patter and orange for singing calls. And I was so organized. It was so easy to pull a record out and put it on the platter. And then if at the last minute, I changed my mind. I knew right where to go with the record. Now that we have mini disc and MP3s and laptops and CD players, at least with me, and maybe it's because I haven't spent enough time becoming comfortable with my technology, it is not as easy to make a split-second decision to change your program. I find I've got a nice little MP3 player. It's bigger than an iPod because I wanted something with a bigger screen. I got my 3,000 or so songs loaded on it by different genres, about, 18 different genres at least, or maybe 24. But an MP3 player is not a quick access type of instrument. So if I want to use that for a portion of my program, or maybe as much of the program as possible, I have to create a playlist ahead of time that has maybe 2 mixers. I'm only going to do 1 mixer, but I'm not positive which one I'm going to use, so I'll put the music for both of them in my playlist, and several patterns and some singing calls, etc., etc., etc. So I've got that in my playlist, but it's still not going to be the order that I want to use it, because I oftentimes will change the order of things. So the mini disc, in that respect, for me, is still the most comfortable, but that's also the technology that I've used the longest. But the mini disc, it pops up. I mean, it takes more mini discs, although now with the new technology, I could get, Tom Dillander was talking about the MD that would record, it was some horrendous amount of 70 hours of music or something, and I thought, how in the world would you find anything on there? So, but anyway, and my next step is to get a good software package for my laptop. I still don't know which software package I want to use to manage my music, because I know that there are you can obviously have a playlist, you can vary the speed and all these things, so a laptop can be very convenient. And while I have 3,000 plus songs on my laptop, I'm not yet using it at a dance. I'm relying on the CDs, the MP3s, and the mini disc. But the laptop has the downfall of so many parties that I do are in dusty conditions. There is no way I'm taking my laptop to a party with dusty conditions. I'll use my MP3 and my MDs instead. So
that's what Saran wrap is for.
Saran wrap. I thought about that. By the way, you always have to think of ways to protect your equipment. When I bought my Bose PAS a year ago, I for years have used trash bags to cover my big speakers for dust and rain. And this Bose stick was a challenge, a 7-foot column. Diaper Genie refills. They smell a little strange because they got this sweet perfume on them, but if you're using them outdoors, what the heck, it'll evaporate. But you just tear off an 8-foot strip of this Diaper Genie, tie a knot in the end, and throw it down over your column, and you're protected. So yeah, you got to keep thinking about how to protect your investment.
There's your helpful hint for the day.
Yes. No extra charge. Now, I'm sure that there was one other thing. Oh, I didn't mention anything about costume yet. And this part is purely opinion. In my opinion, I do not like to see a couple show up at a party event, the caller and spouse, or even the caller is a woman, in full crinolines. That to me is over the top. That's one of their opinions about some people do not want to take part in our activity because they really don't like the costume. But my costume can vary. If I'm doing a party in a barn, I'm going to have blue jeans on or black jeans and more relaxed. If I'm doing a party indoors, it's a Western party, I might have black slacks and a Western shirt. If it's at the Broadmoor Hotel, I'll have slacks and nice boots and a sport coat. So it depends on what the venue is as to how I'm going to dress for that. I try to look professional all the time, but if I'm doing an outdoor picnic that I know most people are going to be wearing shorts and flip-flops, I'm going to comment on that too, then I'll just wear jeans. I'm not going to get too fancy if the group outside is not going to be dressed. If you have any control whatsoever, if you're doing a party for college kids, and you can suggest to them that they send out in their advertising, suggest you do not wear flip-flops. You cannot back up on a line dance or another dance wearing flip-flops without coming out of them. Sandals, yes, but flip-flops, no. And that just, it bothers me, so I try to help them in that regard.
They dance in bare feet. They can do that.
Yes, they can. And they did that at a debutante party I did, but we had a nice wood floor, so bare feet's fine. If you're out in the dirt and the gravel, that ain't so great.
A debutante party in bare feet, okay.
I almost said something, but I better keep my mouth shut. I think that's about it. I mean, there's plenty of things that we maybe didn't talk about. I think Bob would agree with me on this. If you have other questions or comments later, we'd love to get emails from you. And we thank you so much for joining us for this session.
Thank you.